The colonial rule in India is our new topic that we are going to cover, and here we are going to cover the important question answers. There are total 25 question answers, short and long, right? So let us start. What is meant by colonialism? And the answer is colonialism is a system where a powerful country takes control over a weaker country or region, often by force, and rules it politically, economically, and culturally. The colonizing country uses the resources, land, and labor of the colony for its own benefit. What is the age of colonialism in terms of India? So, the age of colonialism in India refers to the period when European powers, especially the British, came to India for trade and gradually established political and economic control over the country. It began in the 16th century with the arrival of the Portuguese and reached its peak when the British East India Company took over large parts of India, eventually leading to British Crown rule in 1858. This period lasted until India gained independence in 1947. Next question is, what were the main commercial interests of the Portuguese in India? The main commercial interests of the Portuguese in India were to control the spice trade, especially pepper, cloves, and cinnamon. They also monopolized sea trade in the Indian Ocean. They established profitable trading posts and ports along the western coast like Goa, Daman, and Diu. Next question is, mention one example of the Portuguese atrocities in India. One major atrocity committed by the Portuguese in Goa was the Goa Inquisition, 1560 to 1812, during which many Hindus, Muslims were tortured and forced to convert to Christianity. Non-Christian religious practices were banned. Write a short note on the Dutch commerce and their competition in India. The Dutch East India Company arrived in India in the early 17th century to trade in spices, textiles, and indigo. They established trading posts at places like Masulipatam, Pulicat, and Surat. The Dutch competed mainly with the Portuguese and the British for control over trade routes and ports. However, over time their focus shifted more to Southeast Asia and they lost influence in India to the British. What were the French colonial ambition in India? So France wanted to profit from India's rich resources like spices, textiles, and indigo. France also aimed to challenge British dominance in India. French leader Dupleix tried to control Indian territories by supporting local rulers and interfering in regional politics. Next question is, how were French colonial ambition checked during the Carnatic War in India? The French colonial ambition in India were checked during the Carnatic War 1746-1763 when they were defeated by the British, especially in the Third Carnatic War. Due to lack of support from France, stronger British leadership, France lost political control. Next question is, how did the British become traders to rulers in India? The British came to India as traders through the East India Company but gradually became rulers by interfering in Indian politics, winning key battles like the Battle of Plassey and the Battle of Buxar, and using diplomacy, military strength, and treaties to gain control over Indian territories. Next question is, what was the doctrine of lapse? The doctrine of lapse was a policy introduced by Lord Dalhousie, the British Governor General of India in the mid-19th century. According to this doctrine, if an Indian ruler died without a biological male heir, his kingdom would lapse or be annexed by the British East India Company. The adopted heirs were not recognized. Right? So this is doctrine of lapse. Next question is, what were the main features of the subsidiary alliance? Indians ruler had to keep British troops in their territory. Rulers had to pay for the maintenance of the British army. They could not enter into alliances or war without British permission. A British resident, that is the representative, would be stationed at the ruler's court, and in case of failure to pay, part of the territory could be annexed. So this is the feature of subsidiary alliance. Next question is, how did India become a paradise to hell in reference to the devastating Bengal and Madras famine? So India once known for its fertile land and self-sufficient agrarian economy, became a land of suffering under British rule due to exploitive colonial policies. The Bengal famine of 1770 and the Madras famine of 1876 were caused not just by drought but by British economic exploitation, heavy taxation, export of food grains, and neglect of relief effort. Profits were prioritized over the people, leading to millions of deaths. This famine transformed India from a paradise of prosperity into a hell of starvation and misery under colonial rule. Okay. Next, what were the main causes of the drain of wealth? The main causes included excessive export of raw material without fair compensation, salaries and pension paid to British officials in India and abroad, profit from British companies in India sent back to England, expenses of British war and administration charged to Indian revenue, and purchase of goods and services from Britain reducing Indian industries. Okay, so these are the main causes that of drain of wealth. What was the impact of decline of indigenous industry on Indian society? Mass unemployment of artisans, weavers and craftsmen, increased poverty and rural distress, shift from skilled work to agriculture leading to over dependence on farming, loss of traditional knowledge and crafts. Next question, that is question number 14. What was the traditional governance structure in India before British rule? So before British rule, India had a decentralized governance system with kings, local rulers, jamindars and village panchayat managing administration and justice. How did the British dismantle the traditional governance system? The British replaced local ruler and system with a centralized colonial administration. They removed the authority of the traditional institutions and brought in British laws, civil services and a new legal system. Next question is, what does the term brown Englishman mean in the context of British rule in India? So the term brown Englishman refers to Indians who were educated in English and adopted British value, manners and thinking, making them mentally British while still Indian by birth. The British aimed to create such a class to serve their administration loyally, right? Next, how did the British change the Indian education system? The British introduced English as the medium of instruction, focus on Western subjects like science, literature and philosophy, ignore Indian languages, culture and traditional education, establish universities and schools in major cities. Why did the British introduce railways in India? The British introduced railways to transport raw materials like cotton, coal and iron from the interior ports to move British goods across India for trade. What was the purpose of the telegraph system introduced by the British? So, the telegraph was introduced to allow fast communication between British officials and the government, especially useful during revolts or military operations. What were the main causes of early resistance that challenged colonial authority? Loss of kingdom and power by Indian rulers, harsh land revenue policies, economic exploitation and destruction of local industries, interference in social and religious practices, British disrespect for Indian tradition, example, Revolt of 1857, Vellore Mutiny, 1806, Santhal Rebellion, 1855-56. Next question, why were the Portuguese, French, Dutch and British attracted to India? So here onward you will get long answer question, okay? So rich trade opportunities. India was famous for its spices, textile, cotton, silk which were in high demand in Europe. Prosperous market and ports. India had well-developed trade centers like Surat, Calicut and Masulipatam, making it a profitable destination for traders. Weakening of Indian kingdoms. So the decline of powerful empires like the Mughal made it easier for European powers to establish trading posts and political control. Competition among European powers. Each European country wanted to dominate Asian trade routes and prevent others from gaining control over India, wealth and resources. Right? Now, why did the British use the divide and rule policy in India? So, to weaken unity among India, the British feared a united Indian population could revolt, so they promoted division to prevent unity. To maintain political control. By dividing people based on religion, caste, and region, the British made it easier to govern and suppress resistance. Third point is to distract from nationalist movement. Dividing communities helped shift focus away from the freedom struggle and reduce support for movements like the Indian National Congress to prolong their rule. Encouraging mistrust and conflict between communities allowed the British to stay in power longer without facing united opposition, right? So these are the 4 points where the question was, why did the British use the divide and rule policy in India? So the first one is to weaken unity among Indian. Okay. Second is to maintain political control, to distract from nationalist movement and to prolong their rule. Now, question number 23. What was the main idea of Macaulay Minute on Indian education? So, the first one is to promote English education. Macaulay wanted English to be the medium of education instead of traditional Indian languages like Sanskrit and Persian. Western knowledge over traditional learning. He believed Western literature, science, and ideas were superior and should be taught to Indians. Create a class of interpreters, right? So he aimed to create a class of Indians who were Indian in blood and color but English in taste and intellect to help the British administration. Replace traditional education. The policy sought to reduce the influence of traditional Indian education and replace it with Western style education. Right? Now, second last question. Explain any 4 early resistance movements that challenged British colonial authority in India. Sannyasi Fakir Rebellion. So, revolt by Sannyasi and Fakir in Bengal against British revenue policies. They protested against tax oppression and British interference in their religious route. Second point is tribal uprising. Tribal like Santhal rebel against land loss and exploitation. They vowed to protect forest and traditional rights. Indigo revolt. So, peasants in Bengal and Bihar resisted forced cultivation of indigo by British planters. They refused to do farming and protested against exploitation by British. Revolt of 1857, sparked by Indian soldier Sepoy in the British Army over grievances including use of grease cartridges, spread widely across north and central India. So these are the 4 early resistance movements that challenged British colonial authority in India. And the last question is, what is the legacy of European colonialism in India? Discuss. So, European colonialism, especially British rule, had a lasting impact on India. Politically, it introduced a centralized government, modern laws, and laid the foundation of democracy. Economically, India faced deindustrialization and poverty due to the drain of wealth, though railways and infrastructure were developed. Socially, Western education and reform movement emerged, but colonial policies also deepened caste and religious division. Culturally, English language and Western ideas influenced Indian society while also sparking a revival of Indian tradition. So the legacy is mixed with both positive contribution and long-term damage, right? So These are the 25 important question answer from the topic the colonial era in India. I hope this is going to help you. If you are watching until end, thank you so much for watching until the end, and this much for this video.